If you drive eastward from Naples about 100 kilometers, you will arrive at last in a village from which there is no escape except along the road you have traveled. It is the village of Bonito and the place where I was born. It is a cul-de-sac, a dead end, a village that cannot grow. In Bonito, there is no future for the ambitious. They must go west to Naples, and from there to the big cities, Rome and Florence, Milan and Turin. Or they must go even farther, out of Italy and across the Atlantic to the United States to escape Bonito's monotony, frustration, and poverty.
These words were written back in 1957 by a successful entrepreneur known all over the world. His shoes have been worn by the most important women on earth: Greta Garbo, Queen Elizabeth, Marilyn Monroe, Evita Peron. How could this be? What story is this? It's the story of a magic spell, the response to a calling, the path of an unflappable soul. The tale of the adventures of a man who was born at the end of the 19th century in a small town in the Italian region of Irpinia, and who ended up as the most famous shoemaker in the world. This is a story of Salvatore Ferragamo, the shoemaker of dreams. A podcast series from Cora Media for Museo Ferragamo, where we'll enter the brilliant mind of a great artist and craftsman who discovered the secret for a perfect shoe and who boldly walked across the history of 20th century fashion and art. First episode, White Little Shoes. We're at Bonito, Irpinia in 1907. Salvatore is 9 years old. He's the 11th of 14 children, living in a 3-floor house with 9 rooms, right in front of the town church. His father, Antonio Ferragamo, and his mother, Mariantonia, work little more than 4 hectares of land. The family lives off the sale of their products: wine, wheat, and oil. However, this isn't enough, so some of the older brothers and sisters have already taken the painful decision to emigrate. Salvatore himself, after just 3 years of elementary school, also has no choice but to follow in his family's footsteps and to find a proper job. But he has other ideas. Or better, aspirations. He's destined to greater things. Salvatore wants to be a shoemaker. Since he was a child, he's always felt an enormous passion for that which is considered one of the lowliest jobs. But also a job that for thousands of years has been surrounded by an almost mystical aura. Just think about the legend of Hermes and the winged sandals he used to travel from the sky to earth, from gods to mortals. Just think about Cinderella's slippers, capable of turning her into a princess and freeing her from the curse of servitude. All over the world, every culture has seen shoes as a symbol of transformation, travel, and metamorphosis. And what is a shoemaker if not the craftsman capable of making this change? Salvatore doesn't know it yet, but he also belongs to this great millenary tale. The days in Bonito can be long and boring, but Salvatore passes them watching the hands of Luigi Festa, the town cobbler, while he works his magic craft. His parents aren't happy about this passion, as they'd prefer him to do something else, to find a different type of work, such as an apprentice tailor, or barber, or a carpenter. But it's useless. Little Salvatore has his mind all made up already. I want to be a shoemaker.
One Saturday evening, I came home to find my mother in great distress. The next day, my younger sister, Giuseppina, who was now just 6 years old, would take her first communion at the village church, with Rosina as her attendant. For this service, it was required that the girls wear white shoes, and we had no white shoes. It was a terrible thing not to have white shoes for the first communion, and my mother cried with anxiety. I did not say anything to my parents, but after the meal, I slipped out of the house and ran across the street to the shop of Luigi Festa, and from him I obtained some white canvas, some cardboard, tacks, glue, 2 small lasts, and the necessary tools, and quietly I smuggled them into the house. Under the stairs in the hallway, there was a solid bench which would serve me well, and there I drew up a chair and spread out the canvas, and the tacks, and the tools, and set up my first cobbler's bench and started to work. It took me a long time, because I had never made any shoes before. Yet, somehow, I knew how to do it. And I worked away, forgetting everything. That same morning, my sisters went to communion in their little white shoes, and everyone was surprised. Goodness, Maria Antonia, what beautiful shoes the girls are wearing! Where on earth did you manage to get new shoes? And my mother replied proudly, my little Salvatore, he made them.
And it's thanks to these little white shoes, magically crafted in just one night, that Salvatore finally gets permission to become an apprentice at Luigi Festa's workshop. Salvatore shows up at the crack of dawn on Monday. He's anxious to start work, but the apprenticeship doesn't begin the way he expects it to. The boy wants to start making shoes, but for now, all Master Luigi has for him to do is to straighten nails.
But that was not all. When I had straightened the nails, I was ordered to sweep the shop. And when I had swept the shop, I was told to look after Luigi's baby son, 3 months old, and an elder child, aged 2. I protested. This was not learning to be a shoemaker. This was learning to be a nursemaid. All Luigi said was, if you do not like to look after the children, you can go home to your parents.
Despite his disappointment, Salvatore knows better than to argue with Master Luigi. He works from dawn to dusk 7 days a week. In his free time, he watches the master handle hammer and nail, needle and thread. He takes advantage of Master Luigi's moments of distraction to sit down at the workbench and to sew, glue, change heels and soles, fix linings and vamps. In less than a year, Salvatore has mastered every phase of the job, and Master Luigi starts to have him do most of the work in the shop. Not only this, Salvatore starts making shoes for the most important people in town. Shoes that Master Luigi himself has never made in his life.
My parents were happy and proud to think they had a son so young who could make the shoes for the signore of the village. In my spare time, I also made shoes for my parents and for my brother Elio and my sisters. I went barefoot for a long time. I did not think about shoes for myself. Besides, I always had plenty of better things to do than make shoes for my own feet.
It's 1912, and Salvatore's father Antonio dies of appendicitis. Things suddenly become even more difficult for the Ferragamo family. Maria Antonia has to raise the youngest children and work the land all by herself. She gets by with just whatever is sent back by the older children from America and from Salvatore's little pay. Don Luigi Belmonte and Don Raffaele Inglese, the town pharmacist and teacher, are the first that truly recognize Salvatore's talent and to convince the mother to allow him to leave for Naples in order to improve his knowledge and put his skills to the test. Salvatore reaches Naples a few months later. He's 14 years old, a shaggy, brown-haired boy with just a few cents in his pocket.
I took up lodgings in one room with some friends from Bonito. We each paid 2 cents a night for the room, a horrid basement, and we were all poor. It was in Naples that I first learned what hunger means. In Bonito, we had never lived luxuriously, but we had never gone without food. In Naples, there were many days when I missed meals. Sometimes, toward the end of this period, when my meager 3 liras and 5 cents had long been spent, there were whole days when I did not eat.
Historian Elvira Valeri can help us understand the historical conditions of this time.
Già dall'Ottocento Napoli, per le popolazioni...
Since the 19th century, Naples has been an attractive prospect for the people of southern Italy. Despite its limited, disorderly economy, it's considered a dynamic city, so different from the countryside with its small villages. The census of 1911 registers a wide web of domestic services in the city, more craftsmanship than industry. Cobblers, makers of wooden buttons, combs, pencil cases, trucks, trunks, and pipes. So for a young man from the country, in a city like this, opportunities can be found by moving from one shop to another, seeking out apprenticeships or even a better salary. Such is the case of the most elegant neighborhoods, with their wooden store windows, which probably were a model for Salvatore in his future endeavors.
progetti futuri.
At last, I went to the biggest and most fashionable shop in the Naples of those days. In that fortnight, I learned everything. In 14 days, I had gone up from nothing in that shop to cutting the shoes and making the models and doing everything there was to do. Everything that the oldest and best cobbler in the firm was doing. I was too young to speculate about the reason for such a rapidity of learning. It simply seemed to me that the knowledge came back as if I had been reminded of a task I had forgotten, as if I was undergoing a refresher course of things I had learned in the past. Perhaps it was absurd, but that is how it seemed to my mind.
Nella sua autobiografia, Salvatore Ferragamo
In his autobiography, Salvatore Ferragamo doesn't just tell us about his adventures in these new environments, but he also reveals a few details, a few cultural and philosophical points of reference that will become models for his life and his work. Like tiny little stones that dot each step of the cultural, philosophical, and religious life of Ferragamo. Going down this memory lane, knowledge as a deep memory stirs up the past and allows him to relive a present knowledge from deep in his soul and his spirit, which he tries to recreate every time he sits down to work on his latest creations.
costruire le sue creazioni.
Salvatore won't stay long in Naples. He has other plans, to return to Bonito and open up shop. For this, he asks for a loan from his uncle Alessandro, the priest of a town near Naples who's already helped him during his stay in the city.
Such dreams I had for my shop, with my mind full of memories of the brilliant Naples shops. I wanted mine to be like them. I wanted to show Bonito that I was not simply another shoemaker making farmers' shoes, but a shoemaker of fashion, distinction, and style.
The dream of a luxury shop starts in a small room in the house, a small space between the main door, which opens up into the road, and the kitchen. Still, Salvatore hires 2 assistants, an 18-year-old apprentice and a young boy to straighten nails.
It was my dream, like a fairy tale. But in the end, the tale would become true. And I didn't need to invent new games with my friends because my game was work.
Soon enough, Salvatore becomes well known in Bonito. Now he has 6 workers in his shop, and they're all older than him. When his brother Alfonso returns to Italy, he sees that Salvatore has grown into a man ready to go to America, where great factories are churning out thousands of shoes every day. Alfonso himself is working in the shoemaking industry over in Boston, and he talks highly about it. At the beginning, Salvatore resists the invitation. His shoes can only be made by his own hand. But how many can he conceivably make? And how many could a machine make? Salvatore is smart, and the numbers don't lie. America is America.
At last I made up my mind. I would go to America, and among the machines I would find my fortune. Before my boyish mind lay a world of miracles, magic, and adventure, and I was eager to sample it.
On the 24th of March 1915, Salvatore is on board the Stampaglia from Naples to New York. His suitcase is heavy. He carries clothes, salami, some cheese, and a few local delicacies for his brothers. To celebrate the great day, Salvatore is wearing a rust-colored gabardine coat with a fur collar and a Neapolitan walking stick. For 200 lira, Salvatore has bought himself a third-class ticket in a 6-cot cabin. But crammed as he is with men, women, and children, he can't get to sleep. So instead, he invests more than half his money in a second-class trip. But it's not mere pride. It's because a sailor tipped him off that it's the best way to speed up the arrival checks. The Stampaglia makes its way to the shore, and Salvatore takes the only dollar he has and rolls it around some paper, so it appears that he has the necessary $20 to dock. In this way, he manages to get through the checks on Ellis Island, the last great hurdle to overcome before reaching the promised land, New York.
As the Stampaglia nosed her way into New York Harbor and anchored to await the arrival of immigration officials and tenders, I forgot my troubles. I looked at the tall buildings and wanted desperately to climb to the roof of one of them. As I knew nothing about elevators, I imagined I should have to walk to the top and was confident that I could do it after my practice in climbing the steep streets and many steps of Naples. Perhaps it is curious, but looking back, I cannot remember feeling any sense of loss. It was all new, huge, and impressive, and I remember thinking that here I could carve a way for myself. It was a country I knew instinctively in which I could be at home.
When the young Salvatore Ferragamo arrives at the Ellis Island Customs, he's one of the 3.5 million Italians that, at the start of the 20th century, have landed in what was then called the New World. Very few of them have any form of education or capital. Only a few of them are professionals and merchants. Despite the fact that all Italian regions are represented, the vast majority of them come from the South. Of these, 60% have a skill or a craft. They're tailors and shoemakers. Without a doubt, this knowledge and skill in making shoes and repairing them will become very important for the American market.
The brothers Alfonso, Girolamo, and Secundino have just moved to California. So it's Salvatore's sister Clotilde who meets him in Boston with her husband, Joseph Coviello, worker at the Thomas G. Plant Shoe Factory in Boston. So many years have passed since Salvatore and his sister have met that he can't make her out in the crowd. Meanwhile, his sister doesn't recognize this classy fellow with a coat and stick. So Salvatore walks right on by, and despite being lost, he makes his way to the house on his own. But he'll have to wait a few hours before the couple make it home themselves, tired, worried, and also annoyed for waiting fruitlessly at the station.
2 days later, I was introduced to the world of miracles. I went into the factory. Yes, it was exactly as Alfonso had described it. Everything I could do, the machines did in the twinkling of an eye. Yet I was not impressed. I was appalled. This was not shoemaking. This was an inferno. A bedlam of rattles and clatters and whizzing machines and hurrying, scurrying people. I stared and wondered miserably. How could I choose a job in this labyrinth?
Salvatore is at an important crossroads in his life. He can either just become another anonymous gear in the industrial machine in exchange for a good salary with which to help his mother back home, Or he can take the plunge and listen to that little voice that he's always had inside, pushing him to follow his dreams. You have listened to a podcast by Cora Media for Museo Ferragamo. Written by Rosella Bettinardi. Editing by Davide Savelli. Executive producer is Lia Chiovari. English version translated by John Vincent Aquilecchia, with the participation of Stefania Ricci, Elvira Valleri. Voice of Salvatore Ferragamo, Eric Alexander. Narrator, Caterina Yuca Sforza. Voice of Stefania Ricci, Liliana Oliveri. Voice of Elvira Valleri, Jenny Elizabeth Kuehl. For Museo Ferragamo, editorial supervision by Stefania Ricci and Ludovica Barabino. Editorial coordination by Paola Gusella. Sound and music supervision by Luca Micheli. Post-production and sound design by Mattia Licciotti. Sound engineer Luca Possi.